The sun blazed mercilessly over the dry plains, its heat pressing down on the world like a heavy hand. The tall summer grass shimmered in waves, and the dusty road leading toward the settlement was empty except for a lone figure trudging slowly along its edge, her steps uneven, her breath ragged. Clara Whitmore clutched her son tighter against her chest, though her arms trembled under his weight. He was too light for a boy of 6. Far too light. Jacob's head rested limply against her shoulder, his blond hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. His lips were cracked, and his eyes half-lidded, barely conscious as the midday heat drained what little strength he had left. Clara tried to shield his face from the sun with the torn brim of her hat, but it did little. Each step felt like walking through boiling sand. Her vision blurred at the edges, spots dancing in front of her eyes as the dry wind whipped her tattered dress against her legs. "We're almost there, baby," she whispered, her voice hoarse, her throat dry as bone. "You just hold on a little longer." But Jacob didn't respond. He hadn't spoken a word since morning. Clara swallowed hard, ignoring the knot of terror rising in her chest. She had walked miles she didn't remember clearly, after their wagon had broken down 2 days ago. She'd burned through the last of their water yesterday. The rabbits she tried to hunt had been too fast, and the berries she found were too few. Her boy hadn't eaten in 3 days, not properly. His breaths now came in faint wheezes, far apart, each one sounding like it might be his last. Ahead, she could finally see the edges of a small settlement, a handful of buildings, wooden signs, a general store, a church with peeling paint, horses tied to a post out front. Civilization. Food. Water. Safety. She nearly cried at the sight, but her body was too dehydrated for tears. As she staggered into town, people turned to stare. A disheveled woman with sunburned skin, bare feet blistered and bleeding, hair matted from days without rest, carrying a half-conscious child. Whispers spread quickly among the onlookers, some disgusted, some pitying, most judging. Clara tried to ignore them. She stumbled toward the general store, pushing through the door with her shoulder when her hand shook too much to grip the handle. The bell above the frame chimed weakly. Inside was cooler, shaded, but the stairs hit harder. Behind the counter stood Mr. Granger, a narrow-eyed man with a neatly trimmed mustache and a starched vest that looked too clean for such a dusty town. He eyed Clara like she was something scraped off the bottom of his shoe. "What do you want?" he asked flatly, not bothering to hide his distaste. Clara swallowed, her voice trembling. "Food, water, please. My boy, he's starving. I'll pay what I can." Her hand shook as she reached into her dress pocket and fumbled out 2 copper coins. The last she owned. Mr. Granger raised a brow at the coins, then at her, then at Jacob's limp form. "That won't buy much. Maybe a heel of bread." "Please," Clara begged, her knees giving way. She leaned heavily against the counter to keep from falling. "I'll work for more. I can clean, sew, scrub floors, anything. Just let me get my son something to eat." Before Granger could respond, Mrs. Dunley, the churchwoman who considered herself the moral authority of the entire county, stepped into the aisle, arms crossed over her stiff gray dress. "Food isn't free," she said sharply. "Plenty of decent folks manage without begging." "I'm not begging," Clara whispered, shame burning hotter than the sun outside. "I'm just trying to keep my son alive." Mrs. Dunley sniffed. "If the boy is starving, that's due to his mother's irresponsibility." A murmur of agreement rippled through the store. A few people turned away, unwilling to get involved. Others leaned in, eager to judge. No one moved to help. Clara's legs buckled, and she crumpled to the floor, clutching Jacob as his small, dry cough shook his body. Panic burst through her like lightning as she tried to rouse him. "Jacob? Baby? Please open your eyes. Mama's here. Just stay with me." The boy didn't answer. Mr. Granger sighed impatiently. "If you're going to make a spectacle, do it outside." Clara looked up at him, eyes burning. "Please! Please help us." He opened his mouth to respond, but he never got the chance. The door of the store swung open with a sharp creak, and all conversation died instantly. A shadow filled the doorway, tall, broad, unmoving, as if a mountain had stepped inside. Daniel Hawthorne. Everyone knew the name. The man owned the largest ranch for 2 counties in any direction. A man with a reputation, quiet, harsh when needed, carved from stone, widowed young, never remarried, kept mostly to himself. His presence commanded silence without a word. He stood well over 6 feet, shoulders wide, sun-browned skin marked by years of hard labor. His black hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and his beard was neatly trimmed, emphasizing the sharp line of his jaw. But it was his eyes that froze people where they stood, a piercing steel blue that saw too much and forgave little. Now, those eyes locked onto Clara and Jacob. Something flickered in them. Something the townsfolk hadn't seen in years. Daniel stepped forward, boots heavy on the wooden floor. Mr. Granger straightened quickly, like a child caught misbehaving. "And Mr. Hawthorne," he stammered. "Good afternoon." Daniel didn't respond. He knelt beside Clara, his massive form folding with surprising gentleness. "Ma'am," he said quietly, voice deep as distant thunder, "is your boy breathing?" Clara nodded weakly. "Barely." Daniel touched the back of Jacob's neck with careful fingers, feeling for fever, then brushed his thumb over the child's cheek. Jacob didn't stir. The rancher's jaw tightened. He rose slowly, turning toward the counter with a hard, cold expression that made Granger visibly pale. "Get them food," Daniel said, voice low and deadly calm. "Water. Medicine. Bread soft enough for a child. Beef broth. Dried fruit. A blanket." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "And a canteen." Granger blinked. Of course. That'll be." Daniel slapped a thick stack of bills onto the counter, enough to buy half the store. "Now." No one moved. "No," Daniel repeated, each syllable ringing like gunfire. This time, everyone scrambled. Mrs. Dunley stepped back so fast she nearly tripped over a barrel. Clara watched in shocked silence as baskets were filled. Food, bandages, a small tin of salve, water skins, more food. Too much food. She didn't understand why a stranger would do all this. Why a man she didn't know would look at her son with grief in his eyes. But Daniel Hawthorne knew exactly why. Because once, years ago, he'd watched another small boy, his own, fade from fever while he stood helpless. He would not watch another child die. Once the supplies were gathered, Daniel kneeled again. "Ma'am, can you stand?" Clara shook her head, dizzy, vision spinning. Without another word, he gently lifted Jacob into one arm, then helped Clara to her feet with the other. She leaned against him instinctively, too weak to resist, and he supported her without hesitation. Where are you taking us?" she whispered, fear mingling with hope. "To my ranch," he said simply. "Your boy won't make it through the night out here." Clara swallowed hard, looking up into his steady, unshakable gaze. Why are you helping us?" Daniel paused. Something raw flickered in his eyes. "Because someone should have helped me once," he murmured. "And no one did." Before Clara could respond, Jacob's small hand twitched weakly against Daniel's chest. That was all it took. They were going with him. And whatever fate awaited them on Hawthorne Ranch was already set into motion. The wagon stood waiting outside the store, hitched to 2 strong bay horses. Daniel helped Clara up into the seat with steady hands, careful not to jostle her more than necessary. He settled Jacob, still limp, still frighteningly pale, against her lap, then placed the canteen into her shaking hands. "Slow sips," he instructed gently. "Too fast and he'll get sick." Clara nodded, though her vision blurred. She tipped the canteen to Jacob's lips, and a few drops of cool water slipped into his mouth. At first nothing happened. Then, after a long, terrifying moment, the boy swallowed weakly. Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Daniel checked the straps on the horses, then climbed into the driver's seat. He flicked the reins lightly, guiding the wagon away from the gawking townspeople. No one dared to stop them. The road stretched out before them, dust rising behind the wheels as the horses trotted steadily forward. For a while, the only sounds were hooves striking hard-packed earth and the faint, shallow breaths from Jacob. Clara finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for helping us." Daniel didn't look away from the road. "You don't need to thank me." "I do," she insisted softly. "Most people don't even look at us. They think we deserve this." His hands tightened slightly on the reins. "People think a lot of things. They're wrong most of the time." Wind lifted a few strands of Clara's sun-bleached hair, and she blinked hard, trying to focus. Her exhaustion pressed in from all sides. Her body wanted to collapse, but Jacob stirred faintly against her lap, and she forced herself to stay alert. "How far is your ranch?" she asked. "About an hour, with him in this condition." Daniel glanced at the boy, worry evident despite his stoic expression. "There's a doctor who visits the ranch every other week. He's not here now, but I know how to treat fever. I know what starvation looks like, too." Clara lowered her gaze. "I should have done more." "You did everything you could," he said firmly. "You kept him alive. That's more than some parents manage." She didn't answer. Shame and gratitude warred inside her. After a few minutes, Jacob's small fingers twitched again. His head shifted slightly, and his eyes cracked open, just enough for him to see Daniel sitting beside them. Who's that?" he whispered weakly, voice thin as wind. Clara brushed a gentle hand through his hair. "Someone who's helping us, baby." Daniel turned just enough to meet the boy's half-conscious gaze. "My name's Daniel," he said quietly. Jacob blinked, processing slowly, and whispered, "You're big." Clara winced, but Daniel's stern expression softened faintly. "So I'm told." Jacob's eyes closed again, but his breathing grew a fraction stronger. "You rest," Daniel said quietly. "We're taking you someplace safe." Clara swallowed around a tight throat. Those words, safe, felt foreign. Too good to believe. Too fragile to hold. The wagon continued onward. With each passing mile, the land shifted. Rolling grasslands gave way to gentle hills, then to a wide valley dotted with cottonwoods and wildflowers, glowing gold beneath the sun. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Finally, Daniel pointed ahead. "There. That's Hawthorne Ranch." Clara lifted her head, and her breath hitched. The ranch was enormous, far larger than anything she had expected. Fences stretched across the valley, marking pastures filled with grazing cattle. A massive barn stood to the left, its wood a deep red from years of weathering. To the right sat a workshop, smoke curling from the forge. Everything was well kept, sturdy, alive with purpose. At the center of it all was the main house, a large two-story home built from solid timber, with a long porch, rocking chairs, and flowers lining the walkway. But beneath its beauty lay something heavier. Its windows looked almost lonely. Clara recognized the feeling instantly. Daniel slowed the horses as they approached. Ranch hands paused to watch them arrive, some from the fields, some from the stables. Their expressions ranged from confusion to concern, but none approached until Daniel raised a hand. "Mark!" he called to a tall, sandy-haired man hauling hay. "Tell Sarah to prepare a bed. And send Jonah for the stew pot." Mark jogged over, nodding quickly. "Yes, sir." He glanced at Clara and Jacob, offering a faint smile before hurrying off. Daniel jumped down from the wagon first, then reached up for Jacob with surprising gentleness. Clara hesitated, instinctively wanting to keep her son close, but she forced herself to trust the man who had brought them here. Daniel carried the boy as though he weighed nothing, his protective stance unmistakable. Clara followed him inside. The cool air of the house washed over her like a blessing. It smelled faintly of cedar, pine soap, and the lingering aroma of last night's supper. The floors were clean, the furniture solid, though the place felt still, as if time had settled into the corners and refused to move. Daniel led them into a modest but comfortable bedroom. "Lay him here," he said, lowering Jacob gently onto the bed. Clara moved to her son's side immediately. Jacob whimpered faintly when his back touched the mattress. "He needs broth," Daniel murmured, checking the boy's temperature with the back of his hand. And slow water. Nothing more for now. Clara nodded mutely. A few moments later, Sarah, a stout, kind-eyed woman in her 50s, entered with a steaming bowl and a cloth. She glanced at Clara with immediate sympathy. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured. "Let's get this little one cooled down." She pressed the damp cloth to Jacob's fevered forehead and spooned a tiny bit of broth to his lips. After a tense moment, Jacob swallowed. Daniel exhaled slowly, a whisper of relief. "He's strong," Sarah said softly. "He'll pull through." Clara sagged against the edge of the bed, shaking with exhaustion, not just from the journey, but from the weight of finally being somewhere that wasn't trying to kill them. Daniel stepped back to give her space. "You'll stay here for now," he said quietly. "Both of you. You're safe." Clara lifted her eyes to him, searching his face for any sign of deception. But there was none. Only sincerity. And something deeper, though she could not name it. "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel looked at Jacob, then at the floor. His jaw tightened again. "I told you," he said softly. "Someone should have helped me once." Clara waited, but he didn't elaborate. Not yet. Instead, he straightened and nodded toward the door. "Get some rest. I'll be close if you need anything." When he left the room, Clara looked down at Jacob sleeping more peacefully than he had in days. She ran her hand across his cheek and whispered a shaky prayer of gratitude. She didn't know who this Daniel Hawthorne was behind his stoic exterior. But she knew one thing. He had saved her son. And because of that, she would never forget him. Not for as long as she lived. Jacob slept for hours, his breathing steadier though still shallow. Clara sat beside him the entire time, afraid to blink, afraid that if she looked away even for a moment, he might slip back into the darkness he'd hovered near for days. The room around her was quiet, lit by the soft glow of afternoon sun streaming through the window. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden light, drifting over shelves lined with folded linens and jars of herbs. The blankets were soft, smelling faintly of lavender. Someone had placed a pitcher of cool water on the nightstand. Someone cared. Clara couldn't remember the last time she'd been somewhere that felt gentle. Hours passed. Clara didn't know how many. Her body wanted sleep, begged for it, but she forced herself to stay awake. She washed Jacob's face with the damp cloth Sarah had given her, whispering stories into his ear, stories of riverboats, and cows with silly names and a bluebird that followed them for a whole week once. Anything to keep him tethered to her voice. Her eyelids drooped despite her efforts, dipping lower and lower. Then she jolted awake as the door opened. "Sorry," Daniel said softly, stepping inside with a plate of food. "Didn't mean to startle you." Clara let out a shaky breath, rubbing her eyes. "I wasn't sleeping." He raised a brow. "Could have fooled me." His tone was gentle, but she still straightened instinctively, her spine rigid from years of needing to defend herself. Daniel noticed. His expression softened. "You don't have to be on guard here," he said. "Nobody's going to hurt you." Clara didn't know what to say to that. Instead, she glanced at the plate in his hands. Bread, cheese, a slice of cold beef, and a cup of warm broth. "You should eat," he said. "You're no good to him if you collapse." She hesitated, then nodded and took the plate with trembling hands. Her stomach twisted painfully at the smell of food, reminding her just how long it had been since she'd had a proper meal. Daniel stepped closer to check Jacob's temperature again. His large hand hovered for a moment before brushing the boy's forehead. "He's cooler," he murmured. "That's good." Clara swallowed a mouthful of broth, warmth spreading through her chest. "Will he be all right?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He studied the child carefully, his brow furrowing. "He's fighting," he finally said. "But he's weak. This kind of starvation, it leaves its mark." Clara's throat tightened. "I know. I should have found more food. I tried. Stop." His voice was firm but not unkind. I told you before, you kept him alive. That matters more than anything. She looked down at her hands, tears threatening. It had been so long since someone told her she'd done anything right. Silence lingered for a few moments, broken only by the soft breaths Jacob took. Daniel cleared his throat quietly. There's something you should know, he began, eyes drifting toward the far wall. Before you settle in too much. My place, it isn't always peaceful. Clara looked up, her heart hitching. What do you mean? He hesitated, searching for the right words. There are people in town who don't take kindly to me bringing strangers here, he admitted. Especially a woman and a child. Clara's chest tightened with fear. Are we in danger? Daniel's jaw tightened. Not while I'm here. But from who? He took a slow breath. People talk. They assume things they shouldn't. My late wife's family doesn't think I should help anyone. They think I'm trying to replace her too soon. Clara's lips parted in surprise. She looked at him more carefully, really looked. Behind his stoic exterior, behind the calm voice and steady hands, was grief. Old grief. Deep grief. The kind that left shadows on a man's soul. I didn't know, Clara whispered. I don't talk about it, he said simply. But I'm telling you this so you're not blindsided. Some in town will be loud about their opinions. Some will try to interfere. His voice lowered, growing darker. They've tried before. Clara shuddered. Why help us then? Why risk it? Daniel turned his gaze back to Jacob, watching the boy's chest rise and fall. Because life doesn't give second chances often, he said quietly. I won't waste one when it's handed to me. Clara studied him, trying to understand this man who seemed both carved from stone and impossibly gentle. Something flickered behind his eyes, pain, memory, perhaps longing. She didn't know. But she knew instinctively that Daniel Hawthorne was a man with a wounded heart. And she also knew he had just risked his standing in town to save strangers. Before she could respond, the door opened again. Sarah stepped in, wiping her hands on her apron. Clara, dear, she said warmly, I've drawn a bath for you. Warm water. Fresh clothes waiting too. Clara blinked in confusion. Clothes? Daniel spoke before Sarah could answer. You can't stay in those, he said, glancing at her tattered dress. Sarah will find something clean that fits. Clara flushed. She had forgotten how torn and filthy her clothes were. I don't want to be a burden. You're not, Sarah said firmly. Daniel nodded. Go. I'll stay with the boy. Clara stiffened. I know, it's all right, You need to rest, he said. Eat. Washington. You're shaking. She didn't argue after that. Her legs were barely holding her up. Sarah guided her from the room, down the hall, into a small washroom lit by lantern light. A tin tub sat in the center, filled with steaming water. Clean towels hung nearby. A simple dress, cream-colored soft cotton, lay neatly folded on a chair. Clara covered her mouth, overwhelmed. I can't accept all this, she whispered. Sarah placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You can. Because you need it. And because Daniel isn't a man who helps halfway. Clara's lip trembled. I don't understand him. Most don't, Sarah said with a small smile. But he's a good man. A hurt one. But good. Clara nodded slowly, then allowed Sarah to leave her alone. She slipped out of her dirty clothes and stepped into the warm water. The sensation nearly broke her. Dirt and sweat washed away, revealing bruises she didn't remember earning and scars long since forgotten. When she sank deeper into the bath, warm water rising to her shoulders, her entire body shuddered. Not from fear, though fear lingered, but from relief so sharp it ached. She couldn't remember the last time she felt warm. She bathed until the water cooled, then dried off and slipped into the dress Sarah had left. It fit surprisingly well, the soft fabric gentle against her skin. Her hair, damp and brushed out, fell past her shoulders in tangled waves. When she looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the reflection. still tired, still thin, still worn from hardship, but no longer broken. When she returned to Jacob's room, she found Daniel sitting beside the bed, massive hands resting on his knees, gaze fixed on the boy. He looked up when she entered. For a moment, just a moment, something like breathlessness passed through his expression. His eyes softened, lingering on her clean dress, her brushed hair, the faint color returned to her cheeks. You look. He stopped himself, adjusting his posture. Better. Clara blushed faintly. Thank you? For everything. He nodded once, as if embarrassed by the gratitude. How is he? She asked, hurrying to Jacob's side. He woke up once, Daniel said. Barely. Tried to say something, but fell asleep again. Clara brushed her son's hair back gently. His breathing was stronger. He's improving, she whispered. Daniel watched the tenderness in her touch, the quiet devotion in her eyes. Something shifted in him, an ache, an echo of something he thought he had buried forever. Clara, he said after a moment, voice soft but steady, you don't have to worry about what comes next. You and the boy can stay here as long as you need. Clara froze, looking up at him. We can't impose. We don't belong here. You belong somewhere, he said. And right now, this is the safest place you'll find. She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped when Jacob murmured softly in his sleep. Mama, don't go. Clara's breath hitched. She pressed a trembling kiss to her son's forehead. Daniel watched them, and the sight pierced him with something sharp and unexpected. He cleared his throat and stood. I'll let you rest, he said quietly. If you need anything at all, I'll be right outside. Clara watched him leave, the door closing softly behind him. She sank into the chair beside Jacob, her heart full and aching at once. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future where they weren't just surviving. A future where they could live. And she knew, deep down, that Daniel Hawthorne was becoming a part of that future. Whether she was ready for it or not. Night settled over Hawthorne Ranch with a quiet stillness that felt almost sacred. The cicadas hummed softly outside the window, and somewhere in the pasture, a horse snorted and shifted. Inside the house, the air was warm, lit by the flicker of lantern light. Clara dozed lightly in the chair beside Jacob's bed, waking every few minutes to check on his breathing. Each time she leaned close, she felt a tiny surge of hope. He was still here. Still fighting. Her muscles ached, but she didn't dare move far from him. Finally, hours later, Jacob stirred. Mama! Clara jerked upright, heart pounding. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Jacob blinked slowly, his eyes still hazy but focused enough to find her face. I'm hungry. The words hit Clara so hard she nearly choked on a sob. Hunger. Not delirium. Not pain. A normal, living need. She kissed his forehead. I'll get you something soft, sweetheart. Before she could rise, the door opened slightly. You should both try to sleep, Daniel murmured, leaning in the doorway. I can sit with him a while. Clara wiped her eyes. He said he's hungry. Daniel stepped fully into the room, expression slipping from stoic into gentle relief. That's a good sign. He crossed the room, stepping closer to the bed. Jacob blinked up at him with curiosity. Are you the big man? He whispered. Daniel froze for a heartbeat. Then, surprisingly soft. Yeah. That's me. Jacob nodded weakly. You saved me. Daniel cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the praise. Your mama saved you, he said quietly. I just gave you both a place to rest. Clara stood, exhaustion making her sway. I'll get him something. No, Daniel said firmly. You need rest. Sarah's already warming broth. He motioned her toward the hallway. Go. Sit down. Close your eyes for a few minutes. Clara hesitated, torn between Jacob and the overwhelming weight of her body begging for sleep. Jacob solved it for her. Mama, go rest, he whispered. I'm okay. She brushed his cheek, kissed him again, then stepped into the hallway. Her legs trembled under her, and she nearly stumbled, but Daniel caught her elbow lightly. Easy, he murmured. You're dead on your feet. I'm fine, she insisted, though she clearly wasn't. Daniel didn't argue. He guided her to a small sitting room down the hall, a room with a faded rug, a rocking chair, and shelves lined with books worn from years of use. Sit, he said. She sat. He lit a lantern and placed it on the side table beside her. I'll bring you tea. You don't have to. I know, he cut in gently. But it helps. He walked away before she could protest again. Clara leaned back in the chair, letting her eyes close for a moment. She hadn't rested properly in days, weeks, even, and now her body craved sleep so deeply she felt it in her bones. When Daniel returned with tea, she opened her eyes and tried to sit straighter. Drink, he said, handing her the warm mug. She took a sip. It was mild, soothing, infused with something calming. Chamomile. You keep herbs? She asked softly. He nodded. My wife used to. Sarah still does. They help with fevers, aches, nerves. Clara set the cup in her lap, fingers warming around it. You lost her? Daniel's face tightened slightly. Years ago. She hesitated. I'm sorry. He looked away, jaw clenching. Don't be. It wasn't your doing. Silence stretched between them, thick, heavy, not awkward but weighted by things unsaid. Clara broke it first. You mentioned earlier that people might interfere. Because of us. Daniel let out a slow breath. Some of them think they know what's best for everyone. They think a woman can't stay under the same roof as a man unless she's kin. Clara's stomach dropped. Are we causing trouble for you? He met her gaze. I don't care about trouble. I care about the boy surviving. And you being safe. Emotion swelled in her chest. No one's cared about us in a long time, she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, really looked, like he was trying to understand every scar she carried. I care, he said simply. Her breath hitched. Before she could respond, Sarah appeared with a small bowl of warm broth. Jacob's awake enough to eat, she said, smiling softly. But he'll only take it from you, Clara. Clara rose immediately, her exhaustion pushed aside by instinct. She hurried back to Jacob's room, and Daniel followed silently. Jacob's eyes brightened a little when he saw her. Mama! Shh! She murmured. I'm here. She helped him sit up with gentle hands, spooning small sips of broth to his lips. He swallowed slowly, then with more strength. Not much, but enough to give her hope. Daniel watched from a distance, leaning against the far wall. His arms crossed over his broad chest, but his expression was soft, almost vulnerable. Sarah excused herself quietly. After several spoonfuls, Jacob's eyelids drooped. Mama, will we stay here? Clara froze. She looked at Daniel. He nodded once. Yes, she whispered to Jacob, brushing his hair. We'll stay. Jacob smiled faintly, then fell into a deeper, calmer sleep. When Clara finally stood, her legs wobbled, and Daniel stepped forward instinctively, catching her arm again. You need to sleep, he said. I'll sleep when he's safe, Daniel said firmly. Nothing will happen to him. I'm right here. Clara swallowed hard, fighting tears. I don't understand you. That's all right, he said quietly. I don't expect you to. He led her back to the sitting room, but her exhaustion had grown so heavy she could barely walk. She leaned against the doorframe, blinking drowsily. Clara, he said softly, you haven't slept in how long? I don't remember, she whispered. You can rest in one of the spare rooms. You'll be close enough to hear if he stirs. She hesitated. I don't want to trouble you. You're not trouble, he said. Come on. He guided her down the hall and opened a small guest room. The bed was simple but clean, the blankets soft and inviting. Clara stood frozen on the threshold. She hadn't slept in a real bed since before her husband died. Her chest tightened painfully as memories surged. Nights spent huddled with Jacob in abandoned barns, under bridges, on dirt floors. Nights cold enough to make her bones ache. Nights full of fear. "Go on," Daniel said gently. Clara stepped inside. The moment she lay down, her body melted into the mattress. She turned her head toward the doorway. "Will you check on him?" she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Of course." Clara's lips parted slightly, and she whispered, "Thank you." Daniel stood there a moment longer, watching her eyes flutter closed. For the first time since she arrived, sleep took her completely, deep, dreamless, healing. He waited until her breathing steadied, then quietly closed the door. He leaned against the hallway wall, running a hand over his face. He didn't understand this woman, or why seeing her and Jacob in pain had awakened something in him he thought was dead. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't, let anything happen to them. Not again. Not ever. Hours passed. The house grew quieter, the lanterns dimmer. Daniel checked on Jacob repeatedly, ensuring he stayed cool and hydrated. The boy slept soundly, his color already better. When dawn broke, Clara awoke with a gasp. Sunlight streamed into the room, warm, golden, gentle. She hadn't seen a sunrise from a bed in years. She sat up, panic flooding through her. "Jacob!" The door opened instantly. "Daniel." His face was calm. "He's all right." Clara sagged with relief. "Where is he?" "In the kitchen. Eating." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "Eating?" Daniel nodded, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "He asked for bread. Sarah's softening some for him." Clara rose so quickly she nearly toppled over. Daniel caught her arm again. How was he always there at the right moment, and steadied her. "You don't need to run," he said softly. "He's fine." Clara walked with him to the kitchen. When she entered, she froze. Jacob was sitting on a small stool at the table, wrapped in a warm shawl, slurping softened bread from a bowl while Sarah fussed over him. He turned and grinned weakly. "Mama!" Clara's knees nearly gave out. She rushed to him, gathering him into her arms. "Oh, baby!" she whispered, eyes filling. "You scared me so much." "I'm okay," Jacob murmured. "Big man helped." Clara looked over her shoulder at Daniel, who stood quietly near the door. Their eyes met. And something unspoken passed between them: gratitude, warmth, fear, relief, and something deeper still. Something neither of them dared name. Not yet. But it was there. And it was growing. Jacob's recovery moved slowly but steadily over the next 2 days. He grew stronger with each meal, his voice gaining clarity, his eyes brightening as his small body reclaimed the strength starvation had stolen. Clara barely left his side, but unlike before, her worry wasn't born of terror, it was born of healing, of watching life return to her boy. Every morning, Daniel checked on them quietly. He brought water, food, blankets, whatever was needed. He spoke little, but his presence filled every space he entered. Clara noticed the way people in the ranch house responded to him, how the workers straightened when he passed, how Sarah spoke to him like he was her own son, how every chore was done with a quiet respect for the man who lived here. Daniel wasn't loud. He wasn't boastful. But everything about him commanded attention. On the third morning, Clara found Jacob sitting at the kitchen table with Sarah again, this time munching carefully on softened vegetables. She kissed his head, her smile wide, her eyes sparkling with relief. When she lifted her head, she saw Daniel at the counter, preparing coffee. "You're up early," he said without turning around. Clara stepped closer, smoothing her dress, Sarah's dress, really, but it was hers for now. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just couldn't sleep anymore." Daniel poured coffee into 2 tin mugs. "You slept nearly a full night, and then some. Your body must have needed it." She looked away, embarrassed. "I'm not used to beds." "I notice," he said simply, placing a mug in front of her. "Drink. It'll help." She wrapped her hands around the warm tin, letting the steam drift upward. The scent of roasted beans filled the air, rich, comforting, something she hadn't smelled since before her husband died. Jacob's small voice cut through her thoughts. Mama, can I go outside later? Not far. Just to see the cows? Clara hesitated and looked at Daniel. Daniel leaned against the counter. If he's up for a short walk, I'll take him. He'll be safe. Jacob beamed. Clara's heart squeezed. I don't want him to push himself too hard, she said softly. I won't let him, Daniel replied. His certainty was so solid it eased her worry. She nodded. All right. But only a little. Jacob grinned, but his eyelids drooped almost immediately after, exhaustion creeping in again. Sarah picked him up gently and brought him back to his room. Clara moved to follow, but Daniel rested a hand lightly on her forearm. He'll sleep. Come outside with me for a moment. Clara blinked, startled. Why? His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I want to show you something. She followed him through the front door, stepping onto the porch. Morning light washed over the valley, casting the fields in hues of molten gold. Horses grazed peacefully. Ranch hands moved in the distance, beginning their work. But Daniel didn't lead her toward the fields. He led her toward a small fenced area on the west side of the house. As they approached, Clara slowed, her breath catching when she saw what lay within. A small wooden swing. Its ropes were old, weathered. The seat was carved from pine, smoothed by years of use. Nearby lay a scattering of toys, a small wooden horse, a carved doll with faded paint, a tin bucket once used for collecting wildflowers. Clara stopped dead. Her heart tightened painfully. Daniel stood beside the fence, hands gripping the top rail, gaze locked somewhere far away. This was my daughter's, he said quietly, voice breaking only slightly. Emma. She was 5. Clara swallowed hard. She died? He nodded slowly. Fever. Quick. Too quick. By the time I got the doctor. He shook his head. There was nothing to be done. Clara's eyes softened. I'm so sorry. He looked down, his jaw tight. My wife, Julia, she died only a month later. Grief took her slower, but just as surely. Clara stepped closer, her hand hovering near his arm, unsure whether she should touch him. I didn't know, she whispered. No wonder you couldn't stand to see another child dying in front of me. He finished, voice rugged. Yes. That's why I helped you. Why I brought you here. His gaze flicked to her. But that's not the only reason. Clara's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Daniel hesitated, then turned back toward the swing. For a long time, this place felt dead, he said. Quiet in all the wrong ways. No laughter. No life. Just emptiness. Clara understood that feeling all too well. Then you arrived, he continued, voice low. And suddenly the house feels different. Warmer. Alive again. Clara's breath caught. I don't want to make you uncomfortable, Daniel added quickly. I just wanted you to know why I'm doing this. Why I'm risking the town's gossip. Why I offered you both a place to stay. Clara stepped around the fence, moving closer to him. You're not making me uncomfortable, she said softly. You're being honest. And that means a lot. He met her gaze, something unguarded flickering between them. Before either could speak again, a shout echoed from the front of the house. Mr. Hawthorne! Mark called, running toward them. You'd better come. We've got company. Daniel stiffened. Clara's heart jumped. Who? Daniel didn't answer. He motioned for her to stay put, then walked quickly toward the front of the ranch. Clara hurried behind him despite her pounding heartbeat. A group of 5 townspeople on horseback were approaching, their expressions hard, their posture rigid. Clara recognized one instantly. Mrs. Dunley. Her stomach turned cold. Daniel's shoulders squared as he stepped onto the porch. Mrs. Dunley pulled her horse to a stop, glaring down at him. Daniel Hawthorne, she barked. We need to talk. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. Daniel kept his tone even. About what? The woman you brought here, Mrs. Dunley snapped. And her child. Clara felt her heart drop. We've come on behalf of the church and concerned citizens, Dunley continued. There are improprieties to consider. A woman living alone under the roof of an unmarried man. Daniel cut her off with a sharp look. She's not alone. She's with her son. Mrs. Dunley sniffed loudly. Exactly the problem. An impressionable child. A scandalous situation. People are talking. Daniel's voice dropped to a growl. Let them. Clara held her breath. Mrs. Dunley adjusted her gloves, unimpressed. Daniel, you are a prominent man. A man of standing. You cannot be harboring a vagrant woman and her bastard child. Clara flinched as if slapped. Daniel stepped forward with a fury Clara had only glimpsed before. You watch your mouth, he growled, his voice cold as steel. That child is worth 10 of any of you. Dunley blinked, startled, but only for a moment. Daniel, listen to reason. No, he snapped. You listen. She and her son stay. And if anyone tries to take them, they'll have to get through me first. A murmur rippled through the riders. Clara felt lightheaded. Mrs. Dunley's eyes narrowed. So that's how it is it? You've made your choice. I have, Daniel said. She looked over his shoulder at Clara, sneering. This isn't over. There will be consequences. Daniel's jaw clenched. Get off my property. Mrs. Dunley's horse reared slightly as she pulled the reins. She turned without another word, signaling for the others to follow. When they rode off, dust trailing behind them, Clara exhaled shakily. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I can leave if... You're not leaving. His tone was so firm, so absolute, she fell silent instantly. You and Jacob stay, he repeated. No matter what they say. Clara swallowed. Why? Daniel stepped closer, his voice quiet but intense. Because this place hasn't felt like a home in a long time, he said. Not until you got here. Clara's breath caught. Her hand lifted instinctively. Daniel's fingers brushed hers, only barely, ghost-like, hesitant, but the touch ignited something warm and terrifying inside her. I won't let them hurt you, he whispered. Clara's voice trembled. Why do you care so much? Daniel swallowed hard. Because I care about you, he said. A silence heavy enough to break hung between them. Then the house door creaked. Both turned. Jacob stood there, wrapped in his shawl, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Mama! Big man, why are you both looking like that? Clara flushed. Daniel straightened quickly. Just talking, kid, Daniel said gruffly. Jacob wandered toward them, leaning into Clara's side. Mama, can I see the horses now? She smiled softly. If you're feeling up to it. Daniel crouched down to Jacob's level. How about we go together? He suggested. There's a gentle old mare who'd like to meet you. Jacob's eyes brightened. Really? Really? Daniel stood, offering Clara a small, reassuring nod before leading the boy toward the stable. Clara watched them walk away, Daniel's massive form beside Jacob's small one, and something inside her chest shifted, slow and certain. She was falling for him. And she was terrified. And yet, for the first time since her world fell apart, she felt the possibility of a future. With Jacob safe. With a home. With someone who cared. She followed them toward the stables, heart pounding with something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The stables smelled of hay, leather, and horses, a scent so earthy and alive that Clara felt her lungs fill with something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Jacob ran ahead, small boots thudding softly against the wooden floorboards. Daniel followed slowly, allowing him the space to explore but staying close enough that the boy never wandered too far. The mare, a gray dapple with a gentle eye and a swishing tail, lifted her head as they approached. Jacob froze for a moment, awe in his bright eyes, before extending a tentative hand. Hi, big lady, he whispered. Daniel crouched beside him, his hand resting lightly on Jacob's shoulder. "She won't hurt you," he said softly. "She's gentle, just like you." Jacob laughed, a small, fragile sound that was still uneven from weakness but carried the pure joy Clara hadn't heard in weeks. The mare nudged him lightly, sniffing his outstretched hand. "She likes me," he said, beaming. Daniel's gaze lingered on the child, and for a moment, Clara noticed a softness in the rancher's eyes she hadn't seen before, a flicker of something unguarded, human. She swallowed hard, heart thrumming as she watched them, an unspoken connection forming in the silence between them. "Would you like to ride her?" Daniel asked, voice low. Jacob's eyes widened. "Can I?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I'll help you. Step up carefully." With Daniel's steady hands guiding him, Jacob climbed onto the mare's back. The horse shifted slightly under his weight, but her gentle nicker reassured him. Daniel stepped back, letting the boy balance, and Clara felt a surge of relief. For the first time in days, Jacob wasn't just surviving, he was living. "Look at you," Daniel murmured, pride softening the roughness in his voice. "Hold tight now." Jacob grinned, and the mare ambled forward slowly, Daniel walking beside them. Clara followed, heart pounding, watching her son laugh freely, sunlight glinting on his hair. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained on Jacob, and she thought she saw something like vulnerability flicker there, quickly masked by the usual stoic calm. They circled the paddock once. Jacob laughed again, leaning down to touch the mare's mane, and Clara's chest ached with a mix of gratitude, relief, and something far deeper, something she couldn't yet name. When the ride was over, Daniel helped Jacob down carefully. The boy hugged the rancher's broad leg, and Daniel's hand rested lightly on his head. Clara watched, breath catching at the intimacy of the moment, so simple, so human, so impossible to force. As the day wore on, Daniel showed them more of the ranch. Rolling pastures, sun-dappled groves of cottonwood, barns where cows lowed softly and calves scurried clumsily. Clara followed, amazed at the expanse of it all, at the life humming quietly under Daniel's careful watch. She had never seen such order, such care, such quiet authority. Jacob darted ahead, exploring everything with cautious excitement. He crouched to watch the calves drink, laughed at the horses flicking their tails, and even attempted to help a ranch hand refill a water trough, Daniel close by to guide him. Clara's heart swelled, watching her son regain strength, joy, and life. By late afternoon, they reached the orchard, where rows of apple trees glimmered with ripe fruit. Daniel motioned for Clara to take a seat on a low wooden bench beneath the tree, the dappled sunlight warming her face. Jacob ran off again, darting between trees with gleeful abandon. Daniel sat beside her, quiet for a long moment. "You've done so much for him already," he said softly, eyes fixed on the orchard. "Even just surviving the past few days, he wouldn't be here without you." Clara felt a lump rise in her throat. "I nearly lost him," she whispered. I didn't know if I could keep going. Every step was terrifying." Daniel's hand brushed hers briefly, hesitant, almost tentative, before pulling back. "You were brave. More than you realize." She met his eyes, searching for judgment, for pity, for anything, but found only quiet acknowledgement. And in that silence, her chest loosened. Perhaps someone could see her strength without needing her to justify it. Jacob returned, holding a small, rough-hewn toy horse he'd found in the barn earlier. "Mama! Look what I found!" he cried, holding it up triumphantly. Clara smiled, laughing softly, the sound nearly foreign in its normalcy. "It's wonderful, baby." Daniel's gaze lingered on her again, something unreadable behind his steel blue eyes. Clara felt her pulse quicken, but she didn't turn away. They spent the evening in quiet companionship. Jacob napped in a small cot in the orchard's shade, Sarah bringing a basket of food for Clara and Daniel to share. They ate simply, bread, cheese, apples, but each bite felt like a feast after days of hunger. Clara found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. The weight she'd carried, The fear, the hunger, the desperation, was easing, replaced by the warmth of safety, the quiet hum of life, and the gentle presence of someone who cared. When the sun dipped low, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose, Daniel stood and stretched. "We should get inside before it cools too much," he said, voice low. "Even hardy children like yours need warmth at night." Clara nodded, feeling her exhaustion return but no longer desperate or panicked. She glanced at Jacob, still half asleep against a blanket Sarah had draped over him. "He's happy," she murmured. Daniel's expression softened. "That's what matters. That he knows he's safe. That he knows someone's here for him." Clara's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, the quiet understanding that life could change, that they might be allowed to hope. That night, Jacob slept soundly in a room that wasn't a barn, a bridge, or a cold floor. He slept under a blanket, in a bed that didn't creak, with the smell of cedar and soap drifting faintly from the sheets. Clara stayed beside him for a while, holding his small hand, listening to his steady breathing. Finally, she left the room quietly, slipping into the sitting room where Daniel waited. He poured 2 mugs of warm milk, handed one to her, and they sat in companionable silence. "You've brought him back," he said quietly. "Not just to life, but to joy." Clara sipped her milk, warmth spreading through her chest. "You've brought us back," she said softly, voice thick. He didn't answer immediately, and she realized he was watching her with that same unguarded intensity that had left her breathless all day. "I don't know how to thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Daniel finally met her gaze. "You don't need to. You've done more than anyone could ask." And in that moment, as the last light of the sun disappeared behind the hills, Clara realized something she hadn't dared admit in years. Maybe they weren't just surviving anymore. Maybe, just maybe, they were beginning to live. The night settled around Hawthorne Ranch with a gentle calm, the stars bright against the velvet sky. Somewhere in the distance, a horse nickering echoed softly. The world was quiet. Safe. And for the first time in a long time, full of promise. The morning sun warmed the valley, painting long shadows behind the grazing cattle and swaying grass. Clara followed Daniel and Jacob toward the stables, the air alive with smells of hay, leather, and the faint tang of horses. Jacob's small hand clung to Daniel's massive one, trusting completely, and Clara's heart swelled at the sight. She felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years: peace. The mare Daniel led forward was a gentle, aged bay with eyes like deep brown pools, calm and knowing. Jacob's eyes widened in awe. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She is," Daniel said, kneeling to Jacob's height. "Gentle. Won't step on you. Won't startle easily." Jacob reached out tentatively, running his small fingers along the mare's muzzle. The horse nuzzled him softly, and he giggled, a fragile, joyful sound that made Clara's throat tighten. She'd forgotten what laughter could feel like. Daniel smiled faintly at her from the corner of his mouth. "She likes you." "I like her too," Jacob said. Clara crouched beside them, brushing a strand of hair from Jacob's face. "I think she does too," she said softly. They spent the morning in the stables. Daniel taught Jacob how to brush the mare properly, how to hold the reins, and even how to feed her an apple safely from his small hands. Clara watched, her heart light, as her son's laughter echoed across the valley. It was the first sound of home she'd heard since the wagon broke down, the first sound of life returning after days of fear and hunger. By midday, the 3 of them had made a circuit through the ranch, Daniel pointing out the fences, the pastures, the barn, and even the orchard where apples and peaches ripened. Jacob had a small straw hat perched on his head, his face flushed with excitement, his bare feet dusty but clean. Clara paused at the orchard, leaning against a low fence, and looked at Daniel. You've built all this yourself?" Daniel shrugged, brushing a hand through his hair, dust clinging to his callous fingers. "Most of it. The rest my father started. But it's been mine for a long time." "It's incredible," she said. He turned to her, a shadow flickering across his face. It's beautiful, yes. But it's also lonely. That's why, well, it's why I wanted to help you. Clara's heart skipped. Because we made it feel alive again. He nodded, eyes briefly meeting hers before glancing toward Jacob, who was now climbing a small wooden ladder to reach the swing. The movement made Clara's chest ache with relief. Her son's recovery was so slow, but these small moments were proof that he was safe, proof that life could still be gentle. Careful, Jacob, Daniel called. I got it! Jacob shouted back, balancing on the swing with a triumphant grin. Clara smiled, brushing tears from her eyes. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding them back, how long she'd been holding in grief, fear, and exhaustion. Watching her son laugh freely was like sunlight breaking through clouds she hadn't known existed. Later that afternoon, Sarah led Clara to the kitchen to help with the preparations for dinner. Clara had insisted, wanting to feel useful, even in a small way. She peeled vegetables, scrubbed potatoes, and chopped herbs under Sarah's careful guidance. You've got a steady hand, Sarah said kindly, noticing Clara's careful movements. You'll be fine here. I hope so, Clara said, glancing toward the window, where Daniel and Jacob were checking the horses. You will, Sarah said firmly. And you'll find that it's okay to accept help sometimes. You don't have to carry the world alone. Clara nodded, thinking of the long road that had led her here, of the despair that had almost claimed her son. Daniel's presence, quiet, steadfast, protective, was something she had never expected but had grown to rely on almost immediately. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Daniel called them to the porch. Dinner would be ready soon, and he wanted to show Jacob something special before the meal. He led them to the small orchard behind the house, where a tiny grove of wildflowers had been planted among the fruit trees. A wooden bench sat beneath a blooming apple tree, its branches heavy with fruit. Close your eyes, Daniel instructed Jacob, a playful smile tugging at his lips. Jacob hesitated, then did as he was told. Daniel whispered something, and Clara felt her pulse quicken. When Jacob opened his eyes, he gasped. A small wooden kite, painted in bright colors, soared above the orchard, catching the last rays of the sun. Daniel had tied it to a string long enough for Jacob to hold, running a short distance to keep it aloft. Jacob squealed with delight, the sound echoing across the fields, and Clara laughed with him. It was pure, unrestrained joy. You made this? She asked Daniel, awestruck. I did, he said, watching her son's face light up. Thought it might be fun. Fun, Clara repeated softly, her eyes meeting his. She felt warmth spread through her chest, something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Safety, joy, hope. And a flutter of something else she didn't quite name. The sun dipped behind the hills, bathing the ranch in golden light as they played. For the first time in what felt like forever, Clara allowed herself to breathe, to hope, and to feel that life could be kind again. When dinner was ready, Daniel helped Jacob down from the swing. Sarah had prepared a simple but hearty meal: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, and warm bread. Jacob ate eagerly, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. Clara sat beside him, a soft smile on her face, watching her son reclaim the life she had fought so hard to save. Daniel watched from across the table, his presence steady, quiet, but completely reassuring. And in that moment, Clara realized something: she wasn't alone anymore. She had a home. Her son had a home. And somehow, in the midst of all their struggles, they had found someone who cared, someone who had stepped in when the world had turned away. After dinner, the three of them sat on the porch, watching the stars begin to twinkle overhead. Jacob leaned against Clara, yawning, exhausted but happy. You know, Daniel said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, I never thought this place would feel full again. But now it does. Clara's gaze met his, and she smiled faintly. I think life has a way of surprising us, she whispered. Daniel's hand brushed against hers, tentative, almost shy. Yes, he said quietly. It does. They sat together in silence for a long moment, the stars above bearing witness to a new beginning. And in that quiet, Clara allowed herself to believe, truly believe, that for the first time since her world had fallen apart, they could have a future. A safe, warm, loving future. With Daniel. With Jacob. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine happiness. The next morning, the ranch stirred with the gentle sounds of life, horses nickering, hens clucking in the coop, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Clara woke to the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, and for a moment she just lay there, listening to the harmony around her. Jacob was already up, bounding into her room with the enthusiasm only a child could muster. "Mom! Mom! Daniel says we can ride today!" Clara smiled, rubbing her eyes. All right. But slow down, okay?" Daniel appeared at the doorway, arms crossed but with that familiar hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Breakfast first," he said, voice gentle. "You need energy if you want to ride without tumbling off." Jacob groaned dramatically but obeyed, while Clara chuckled. She followed Daniel into the kitchen, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years, the kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. After breakfast, Daniel led them to the pastures, helping Jacob mount the gentle mare he had bonded with the day before. Clara followed on foot, holding the reins of a second horse Daniel had saddled for her. "You ready, Jacob?" Daniel asked. "I'm ready!" Jacob shouted, gripping the reins tightly. They rode slowly at first, Daniel guiding the way, Clara following closely behind. The valley spread out before them, a tapestry of green and gold under the bright morning sun. Birds soared overhead, and the distant mountains loomed peacefully. For the first time since they'd arrived, Clara felt a deep sense of belonging. Each step of the horses, each laugh of her son, each glance from Daniel felt like a stitch in the fabric of a life she thought she'd lost. By noon, they stopped near the creek that ran along the edge of the ranch. Jacob eagerly jumped off his horse, running to the water's edge. He threw small stones into the creek, giggling as they skipped and splashed. Clara joined him, crouching beside him. "You're getting really good at that," she said. "I'm going to win a skipping stone contest one day," Jacob declared proudly. Daniel arrived beside them, crouching to their level. "I think you already won the most important contest," he said quietly, looking at Clara with something unspoken in his eyes. Clara's cheeks warmed, and she nodded, unsure how to respond. Words seemed inadequate to express the gratitude and tenderness swelling inside her. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Daniel suggested they head back. The horses ambled along, content, and Jacob fell asleep against Clara's shoulder during the ride home. That evening, as they settled by the fire in the main house, Clara felt a peace she had never imagined possible. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows across the room, and Daniel carefully poured hot chocolate for her and Jacob. "You've made this place perfect," Clara said softly, watching her son's sleeping face. Daniel's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "We made it perfect," he corrected gently. "All of us." Clara nodded, a lump in her throat. She realized that home wasn't just a place, it was the people who made you feel safe, loved, and alive. And here, in this simple, sun-warmed valley, with the man who had quietly become her anchor and her son reclaiming his joy, she finally understood what that meant. The days passed in a comforting rhythm. Daniel taught Jacob to ride more confidently, Clara learned the rhythms of the ranch, and the three of them shared quiet meals, long walks, and small adventures. They planted a small vegetable garden together, laughing when Jacob's enthusiasm got the better of him, and he accidentally watered the scarecrow instead of the plants. Clara began to feel stronger, lighter. Her heart, once burdened with fear and worry, began to swell with hope and love. And through it all, Daniel remained steady, patient, and kind, his presence a constant reminder that life could be gentle and generous when you let it. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the golden light bathed the valley, Daniel took Clara's hand. "I know we've been through a lot," he said softly, "but I want you to know I'm here. For you. For Jacob. For us. Clara's eyes glistened with tears. I think I've been waiting to hear that my whole life, she whispered. Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then it's time you believed it. Jacob, now perched on the porch railing, clapped his hands. Can we tell everyone about our kite race tomorrow? He asked, beaming. Clara laughed, pulling him into her arms. Yes, we can, she said, feeling a joy so pure it seemed to fill every corner of her heart. As night fell, the three of them sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars emerge one by one. Clara leaned into Daniel, Jacob resting between them, and for the first time in years, she felt whole. Life was not perfect, but it was theirs. Filled with laughter, love, and the quiet certainty that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together. And for Clara, that was more than enough. It was everything. The stars above twinkled like promises kept, and the gentle breeze whispered of countless tomorrows, bright, warm, and full of life. For the first time, Clara closed her eyes and truly smiled, knowing she was finally home.